Well, it's year two for Russell Wilson in Denver. It's year one for Sean Payton. And so far, their training camp has not gotten off to the best of start. Tim Patrick, torn Achilles, KJ Hamler, heart issue that's going to keep him out. So here we are again. They're getting beat up before the season even starts. Does that at all change the expectations for Denver coming into this year?
Well, that's a good question. What are the expectations for Denver this year? Because obviously they're not going to win the division. And obviously they are not going to be better than Baltimore, I would say. So I guess Denver's in that gluttony of teams trying to fight for the 6th or 7th wild card in the AFC this year. So I guess not making the playoffs would feel like a disappointment, but I don't think this Denver team is good enough to make the playoffs in the AFC specifically. Like they're not that good. I mean, they've last year traded off a couple of big pieces on that defense. We know Bradley Chubb was the biggest of them that was traded at the deadline. And their defense was still really good last year. Defense is the position that's harder to predict whether it's going to be good year over year. But let's say that Denver still has a very good defense going into next year. That then puts the onus on Sean Payton to develop that offense. But like you said, they have lost 2 of their top 4 wide receivers at this point. There was already talks about Jerry Jeudy getting traded at the deadline. So I don't know if he's got the same rapport with Russell Wilson that they might need. So then it leans on Javonte Williams, and the Broncos are leaning on an injury-prone running back entering his 4th season. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be as catastrophic as last year, but they also don't have a whole lot of talent on that football team. So yeah, I don't know where the expectations even lie for Denver this year. They're, by my count, the 3rd best team in the AFC West. And if they're the 3rd best team in the AFC West, that means they're probably shooting for like 8-9 this season.
When you consider last year what their strength was with that defense, there was the stat, of course, if they scored 18 plus points in these respective games, they would have been a playoff team last year. And if you insert Sean Payton, instantly that should be a boost to the offense, right? You get a guy with a better offensive scheme. Maybe he can revive Russell Wilson, and that's really what it's going to fall back on. If Russell Wilson looks like he did last year or the year before that, it doesn't look like Russell Wilson from 2019, or hell, even just not even, he doesn't even need to be that good. He just needs to be serviceable Russell Wilson again. Then this team can live off the back of their defense, live off a running game. You mentioned it too, though. Javonte Williams is coming off an ACL injury. So how good is he going to be? I think most people, especially in the fantasy football community, want to believe that Javonte Williams will still come back fine from this one. ACL, obviously, we've seen a lot of running backs go through it over the years. It's kind of the NFL version of Tommy John, where guys just kind of have to go through it at some point. Don't think most teams, like whenever they suffer like a 3rd wide receiver injury, 4th wide receiver injury, really realize how much of an impact that is until they get middle of the year. Because you mentioned Jerry Jeudy, he even battled injuries. I think it was week 1 of last year where we thought he had a season-ending injury. So suddenly, you have an injury to him, Cortland Sutton gets banged up, and then you realize just how thin you are at wide receiver, and Russell Wilson, who's already kind of like fighting for his NFL career, just suddenly has no one to throw to. What is it? Big Albert, Big A, Big O, whatever is their tight end. Is that going to be like your top guy if like Sutton gets a concussion and Jerry Jeudy has a banged up ankle?
Apparently, number 1 on the depth chart is someone named Greg Dulcich at the tight end position. And then they have Alberto and Adam Troutman still hanging around in the NFL is in their tight end room. I don't know who any of those people are, but they are their 3rd wide receivers, essentially.
Well, I guess that makes sense, right? Troutman, because I'm pretty sure he got drafted by the Saints when Sean Payton was there.
You would be correct. Yes, he did indeed get drafted by the Saints back in 2020. The Broncos feel like this year the team that's like, we get to week 17 and then there's going to be like one result that locks up a playoff berth for like the Chargers, and it just eliminates like 4 teams from the in the hunt graphic. That's what it feels like Denver's going to be this year. They're going to be one of those teams that like gets bumped out of the in the hunt graphic like in week 17 because the 6th wild card's been locked up in the AFC. That feels like where Denver's kind of headed for this year. But they're digging themselves out of a big hole. And I'm not talking about just the Nathaniel Hackett catastrophe of last season. It is 8 seasons of being one of the worst run organizations in the NFL. The Denver Broncos right now have the second longest playoff drought in all of the NFL. Like, we think of them having Peyton Manning and everything that was going on when they were competing with the Patriots. They went to 2 Super Bowls and made a divisional playoff with the number 1 seed. Since the end of that Peyton Manning run, they have been one of the worst run organizations in football. They have used 14 different quarterbacks and 1 wide receiver at quarterback in the span of the last 8 seasons. I used to be able to name them off the top of my head, but there's a Mark Sanchez in there twice. There's 2 Mark Sanchez runs for the Broncos in that span. So they have been essentially the new Cleveland Browns over the last 8 years, and they are now trying to dig themselves out of that hole with Russell Wilson and Sean Payton.
Well, we kind of talked about it last week, but I should ask you on camera, on microphone here. Did Sean Payton make a mistake choosing Denver? He could have stayed in the analyst booth one more year. There's plenty of great open positions coming up, I think, next season. Did he make a mistake jumping the gun for Denver?
It's hard to tell anyone who's making $18 million a year for the next 6 years that they made a mistake. But in terms of like which job gives him the best opportunity to succeed, yeah, he might have made a mistake. But also, that Walmart money hits a little bit different when it shows up into your bank account. It's hard to turn down being the second highest paid coach in the NFL, which reportedly is what Sean Payton is right now. Like, we don't know the exact contract terms of NFL coaches, but reportedly he's the second highest paid coach in the NFL right now behind Bill Belichick. I would say it's hard to turn down that kind of money, but
okay,
the
sure,
Broncos didn't even want him.
Well, yeah, no one cares about Sean Payton's pocketbook. We don't care about that. But yeah, so let's focus more on in terms of success, like, because my point is, like, next year, I could see Brandon Staley getting fired with the Chargers. I could see Mike McCarthy being out in Dallas. Both situations, especially the Chargers one, hell, I was all aboard the Brandon Staley should have been fired last year and just go out there and offer your best contract to Sean Payton. And obviously the Chargers didn't do it. We know Spanos has a reputation for being cheap at head coach, because even Brandon Staley is his 3rd or 4th first time head coach that he's hired recently. So
in a row, yes. In a row. They have gone from Mike McCoy to Anthony Lynn to Brandon Staley.
But I would much rather tie my ship to ascending Justin Herbert than what we saw with Russ last year. Hell, Sean Payton, he had a weekly segment on Coward's Show where we would go on and talk about what's happening in the NFL. And the Broncos, of course, came up more often than not because the Broncos were an interesting story last year. And Sean Payton knew what he was getting into. He would talk about it weekly, what was going on in Denver. And he's still talking about it. Obviously, we go back to his comments last week about Nathaniel Hackett, throwing him under the bus, one of the worst head coaching jobs ever. I'm pretty sure if we check the tape, we check back every word, he probably said a few negative things about how Russell Wilson was slowing down last year, just because you have to look at it through a different lens as an analyst versus being a coach, or being specifically the coach of that player that's struggling. He knew what he's getting into, and it doesn't matter what the contract is. I get it, but every NFL team is going to pay well. I'm sure he could have got $18 million next year too.
It was the new owner-itis situation, right? The owners wanted a splash move at the head coaching position, and so they got up and said, we are going to hire the best head coach available on the market. And so they offered DeMeco Ryans a contract, and DeMeco Ryans turned them down for the Houston Texans. So then they pivoted to their second option, which was Sean Payton. Remember that, people. The Denver Broncos wanted to hire DeMeco Ryans. DeMeco Ryans said that the Texans, who were run by a youth pastor for 3 seasons, were better than the Denver Broncos head coaching job. DeMeco took the Texans job over the Broncos job, and then the Broncos pivoted to their second choice of Sean Payton. So that tells you kind of where Sean Payton's reputation lies right now in the NFL. And by the way, they had to give up a first-round pick to make that happen. Like, I don't think that Sean Payton is enough to fix all of your problems, because Sean Payton, with not enough talent on the roster, we've seen what that becomes. Like, Sean Payton is the kind of coach that will elevate your roster if you give him talented players. And people will talk about him losing all those games in the playoffs and all that stuff and blah, blah, blah. Like, I understand that part of it. And Sean Payton got the perfect quarterback in Drew Brees to reinvent his career and win a Super Bowl. Like, Sean Payton, and by the way, they won more regular season games in 4 years with the Saints between 2017 and 2020 than any team in NFL history that didn't make a Super Bowl.
No.
Like, they were great.
I will push back because I don't want to completely undervalue Sean Payton, because there were years where Drew Brees was injured and you had to insert a Teddy Bridgewater, or you had to have Taysom Hill in there for a few snaps, or Jameis Winston came in for a game. And Sean Payton's record in those games was pretty good. He was able to still keep things going, even with injuries, obviously not having Michael Thomas basically the last 2-3 years.
Yeah. And where I think there's a difference there is the Saints had talented players on offense all throughout Sean Payton's tenure with New Orleans. And that's why the general manager, Mickey Loomis, with the Saints has been there for just as long as Sean Payton has. They had talented players there, surrounded by Drew Brees for all of those
But
seasons.
I don't want to say that Denver doesn't have talented players. Like, I think Cortland Sutton is a talented wide receiver. I think Jerry Jeudy is a talented wide receiver. I think Javonte Williams is a talented running back. We still have to see how he comes back from this ACL, but is a talented running back.
No, but I'm talking about top of the line players in the league. Like, for whatever you think about Mark Ingram made one Pro Bowl with the Saints. They had Mark Ingram, they had Jimmy Graham. And then when those two players were done, they pivoted to Max Unger and drafted Ryan Ramczyk on the offensive line. Alvin Kamara has been an all-pro running back. Michael Thomas has been an all-pro receiver. They've had consistent top-of-the-line talent.
I think a lot of guys would say that guys like Jeudy, who was a former first-round pick, Cortland Sutton, a former first-round pick, they think could be that or be considered that had they just had consistent quarterback play. One of the narratives coming into last year is, wow, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, they're getting it done with lesser talent at the quarterback position. You get Russell Wilson in here, future Hall of Famer Russell Wilson in here, and their stats are just going to blow up. These guys are going to be consistently 1,000, 1,500-yard wide receivers. They're going to put up career touchdown numbers. And then last year happened. And was it their fault, or was it their quarterback's fault? Was it their coach's fault? Probably a combination of both. But like, I don't think they're lesser talent because their coaches and their quarterback let them down.
I think with Cortland Sutton, I never bought into the hype, so I've never considered the possibility that he would be a top-end receiver. With Jerry Jeudy, I understand it, though, because Jeudy was the top 10 prospect in that draft class. He was expected to come in and be the number one. He's had one above-average season. I think he had 900 yards in, I think he only played 12 or 13 games his second season, but he had close to 1,000 yards on pace for. Like, Jeudy, I could understand the belief that he could be a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver, even in the AFC, which has all of these, Tyreek Hills and Stephon Diggs and I'm forgetting someone, but point being Jamar Chase. You could make the case for Jeudy being a top end receiver. And at this point, they're betting on that being their best path forward is development of players already in house. Cause I know they signed Zach Allen. I know that they signed Mike McGlinchey on the offensive line, but other than that, they didn't really change the roster all that much from last year. They were betting on Hackett is a disaster and we can run it back with a different coach and that will be our path to improvement. And my point from the beginning is I don't think the Broncos have very good players. Even last year, my preseason prediction for the Broncos was they would be competing for the 7th wild card in the AFC. And it all fell apart on them at the end of the season, but they haven't gotten any better since
I will play a little bit more devil's advocate here. I do know that at one point they were on their 3rd left tackle last year.
Yeah.
That stuff matters, right? It does play into the grand scheme of things, like having injuries at the offensive line. Now, again, I go back and I did watch those Broncos games and thought to myself, Russell Wilson, again, just isn't making the best decisions. Like, there's blooper reels of him having guys literally wide open, middle of the field, the Colts game, right? Thursday night last year, where he had KJ Hamler, speaking of KJ Hamler, wide open, middle of the field. People are questioning whether Russell Wilson was legitimately blind.
The best thing I can say about the Broncos right now is they will be better than the Raiders, which is something they were not last year. So I think they'll be better than the Raiders because last year they were, if I'm doing my math correctly in my head, they finished 14th out of 16 in the AFC. And while there's a lot of like glut in the middle of the AFC this year, I don't think they're going to be that bad. Like, I don't think they're going to be so bad that they're that the Seahawks, I think they just used the last Seahawks pick, so that they'll be drafting at the top of the draft. Like, I don't think it'll be that bad next season that they'll be in the top 5 of the draft again. But I don't think the roster is all that talented. And this is me saying that I think Russell Wilson is somewhere between what he was at the end in Seattle, which was like a tier tier 2.5, tier 3 quarterback, and where he was last year, which was legitimately one of the worst starters in the NFL. I think Russell Wilson's somewhere in between at this point. I still don't think that's going to be enough to turn a corner for Denver because they don't have enough talent.
And you mentioned this earlier, but where they fit into the grand scheme of the AFC, right? The Chiefs, if we put them in pen to win the division again, then they have to jump over a lot of AFC North teams, a lot of AFC East teams. The AFC South, I mean, maybe like a Tennessee or something surprises you. There's always that like one, right?
Yeah, if I told you that Tennessee, Indy, or Houston could be a spicy 7-10 this season, you would believe me. If I told you any of those teams were 7-10 and caused problems for people.
And we're also assuming that the Jaguars take that next step this year and just win that division. And then again, in division itself, you mentioned you think the Broncos will outright be better than the Raiders. Who knows? Maybe Jimmy winning Garoppolo comes in and gives them 7 wins or something like that, and they're better than the Broncos.
I can't even look at that with a straight face. It's just funny to think about.
Hater.
They're talking about the Raiders might just cut Josh Jacobs, just rescind his franchise tag and be like, okay, see ya, you can leave.
Yeah, they're a shit show, but still, it's a possibility. It's in the cards because the Raiders, I think, beat the Broncos twice last year. You had the Chargers, and then the Chargers too, another double-digit win team. And regardless of how much I have disdain for Brandon Staley as head coach, and I think that he's a bit of a chump in that position, they were a double-digit win team. So you also have to leap over them too. So there is that. I recognize they have to jump over like 5 teams to even be in the playoffs this year.
Yeah. And look, before the Broncos traded for Russell Wilson, they were not good enough. I said it at the time. I said it after. They were not good enough, but I commend them for saying we're still going to try and get a franchise quarterback anyways, even if it costs us Noah Fant, 2 first-round picks, and a second-round pick. I commend them that they said we're still going to try it anyways. But the Broncos, they said we're going to go for it. We're going to give up essentially 3 first-round picks because Noah Fant was a first-round pick 2 years prior. We're going to essentially give up 3 first-round picks for Russell Wilson. And I commend them for saying we're going to try it because they didn't have enough talent at the time. It was a catastrophe last year, but I still thought at the start of the year, they've got enough talent to compete for the 7th wildcard spot. And this year I can say they've got enough talent to compete for the 7th wildcard spot. That seems to be where I'm at with the Broncos right now, is if they put the pieces together correctly, they won't be better than Kansas City or Cincinnati or Baltimore or Los Angeles Chargers or Buffalo, or the obligatory team that wins the AFC South, but they could maybe get that last wildcard. They are just as talented as the Jets. That's my thinking. They are just as talented as the Jets, and one of those teams might get into the playoffs.
Denver, target painted on their back. What do you think this year? Big expectations coming in with Sean Payton. Can Russell Wilson revive his career? How much do these injuries in training camp hurt them? Like to hear your thoughts, any and all things Denver Broncos. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to our channel, find us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.